All right, here we're looking at our notes for section 2.2. And up at the top, I label it 2.2 and 2.3 because all of our notes for the next two sections are going to go in this one paper. But so we always want to flip back and start at our learning targets and see what we're really doing. So that's this one right here. And we're just looking at the first part today, as I can solve inequalities using addition and subtraction. And then we're going to add in our multiplication and division in just a little bit. So you're going to need this piece of paper and fold it over so we know what we're looking at. So today we're just going to talk about the addition and subtraction properties of inequality. So these should look fairly familiar because they're very much the same as our properties of equality that we talked about way back in chapter 1, somewhere back in chapter 1. Our properties of equality. You'll see our same thing. So one thing I want us to remind us as well is these inverse operations. We're going to be doing the same thing. We're undoing what's already been done. So if this is something you don't really remember or you're kind of struggling with, or you never got down in your notes the first time, make sure that this little table right here is in this section as well, because we're going to be doing these same inverse operations. Okay? The only difference is we're looking at inequalities, and those inequality symbols we looked at in our last section. So our first thing is our addition property. So our addition property tells us, and we're going to do some tells us and then look at an example in our notes so we have both of them. So adding the same number to both sides makes the same inequality. So for example, that just tells me that if I add the same thing to both sides, I haven't really done anything. So I can go ahead and do that. So we are going to look at this example and kind of walk through it. So I have x minus 6 is greater than or equal to negative 10. So remember in our last section we talked about that we like to keep our variable on the left side, and that's true here as well. Okay, so using the addition property, I see that something is being done to my x, and I have to undo that. So using my inverse operations, I know that I have to use my addition property to add 6 on this side to get rid of it, and then I also have to do it to this side, because what I do to one side I have to do to the other. So I'm left with x, my symbol does not change, is greater than or equal to, negative 10 plus 6 gives me a negative 4. So I see I have back what we talked about as I have my variable, I have my symbol, and then I have my constant. So let's go ahead and graph that real quick. So you can just make a really quick little number line. I know that my number has to be at negative 4. So that's the only piece I care about. So on my number line, I see that I have that equal to part, so that's going to be a closed-in circle, and my arrow is pointing to the right, so I'm going to shade up to the right. So everything over here. So now I've also graphed it. Okay, so now let's look at our subtraction property. It follows pretty similar to the addition property, but here if I subtract the same thing, so subtracting the same number from both sides gives us the same inequality. So let's go ahead and look at an example here. So here I've got negative 8 is less than 1.4 plus m. Okay? So, and there's a reason I'm doing this one, so I want to talk through it. So I see, again, I want to get my m all by itself. So I look and I say, oh, well, something's being added to it, so I want to use my subtraction property to go ahead and take care of that. So I'm going to subtract 1.4 from both sides. So I'm left with a negative 8 minus 1.4 is a negative 9.4 is less than, my sign stays the same, m. Well, this is not quite how I like to have it written. I always want my variable on the left side. So I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite this so that my variable is on the left side. So I'm going to start with my variable, and I see that it was towards the bigger side or the taller side of my symbol. So it stays by the bigger side, negative 9.4. Okay, so now I have it as my variable, and then my symbol, and then my constant. It's in the order that makes it easy to graph. So now we're going to go ahead and graph that one as well. Okay, so here's my -9 and my -10 and my -8. So for this one, I see it's not equal to, it's just going to be greater than. So it's an open circle at 9.4. So 9.4, my graph's going to be right about there. And it's an open circle because it's not equal to. And then I shade this way as well. Okay? So this is just an example of not only the subtraction property, but also how I can take my equation or my inequality that I end up with and kind of flip it over so that my variable is on the left side. And this just makes graphing a whole lot easier because then our symbol actually tells us the direction that we shade, and it's just easier to read it. So now it's m is greater than a -9.4. So go ahead and use both of these symbols to kind of help us and go along with that. So really that's it for section 2.2. You're going to be using these two properties to not only solve these, but also then graph them. We're also going to always be graphing these inequalities. Make sure that you can also be able to take from words, from a word problem, and do these kinds of things to it as well, and then graph those. As always, when you get stuck or have questions, come find me and we'll work through them.